Welcome. There is no night. Well, technically there is a night, it just isn't a single night like we thought. A bold claim, I know, but hear me out. As we all know, the knight's identity is one of the greatest mysteries in Deltarune. Everyone is a suspect. Is it Chris? Is it Father Alvin? Is it Gaster? Well, what if I told you it's all of them? What if I told you the Roaring Knight, the person who created the Card Kingdom and Cyber City Dark Worlds, the person who's been terrorizing the streets of Hometown, isn't a single person, instead it's multiple people, each working towards their own goals. Look, I know how crazy this sounds, but what would you rather watch? Gaster's The Night Theory number 2673, or something that thinks outside the box? If your answer is the latter, then this video is right for you. I want to shout out Reddit user Selnanilla for their posts on the subject. I did steal a couple of their arguments, so the link is in the description below. Now let's get right into the theory. Now, I want to make one thing clear. I'm not saying this theory is actually true. We only have 2 out of 7 chapters to work with here, so there's simply not going to be enough evidence to prove this theory. I'm just going to show why it's technically possible there's more than one night. First, let's discuss everything we know about the knights so far. Let's start with chapter 1. Sham says that one day, a strange knight appeared, and this knight overthrew the 3 kings and put the Spade King in power. Now, the Spade King also has a lot to say about the knight. By the knight's will, I shall shatter your heart to pieces. The knight has appeared, the knight that pulls the fountain from the earth. Do you now see our new purpose? Soon the world will be blanketed in darkness. These lines reveal a lot about the knight and their relationship to the king. Firstly, it reveals that they told the king about their master plan. Do you now see our new purpose? Soon the world will be blanketed in darkness. He's describing the roaring. He's saying that his purpose for existing is so that the knight can cause the roaring and blanket the world in darkness. This means that he's met the knight before and talked to them about the roaring. It makes sense then that the knight introduced themselves as the Roaring Knight to the king. This will be important later. Jevil also talks about the knight. He says, the hand of the knight is drifting forward. Soon the queen returns, and hell's roar bubbles from the depths. This line implies that Queen's Dark World will be created by the knight's hand, the same knight that created his world, which implies that the knight is a single person. I'll explain why this might not be the case, but for now we'll move on. In chapter 2, Queen is obsessed with the knight. She spends the entire game trying to force Noelle to be the new knight, now that the old knight has taken its leave. She also claims that the Roaring Knight created her Dark World. She even has a video of them making it. Spamton also briefly mentions the knight, saying, speaking of communion, Chris, did you know that the knight— No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Okay, so what does this all mean? Why did I bring this up? Well, it's because it seems pretty obvious that the knight is one person. Jevil's line basically confirms it, and both king and queen call the person who made their Dark World the Roaring Knight. What are the chances that 2 different people randomly decided to call themselves the Roaring Knight? Like, this theory doesn't make a whole lot of sense, except it does. All of these problems can be easily solved with a convoluted explanation. Shout out to Selnanilla's— Shout out to Selnanilla's post, because I will be taking some of their reasoning. So for one, Queen doesn't actually know who the knight is. She's never met them before, and she doesn't know what they want. She even admits this when she says that she's just assuming what the knight's plan is based on their actions. The only confirmed interaction she's had with the knight is the video she took of them making her world, and that's it. But if she's never met them before, why does she call them the Roaring Knight? Why does she say they want to cover the world in darkness? She says that because the king told her. So king and queen have some sort of history together, they clearly know each other, and since king is such a devoted follower of the knight, maybe he told her about them. Maybe he said that the Roaring Knight created his world and that they want to cause the roaring and blah blah blah. And queen simply assumes that the person who created his world also created hers. She even uses the exact same wording as the king. Until the night appeared, now the path is clear. Then with the world covered in darkness, no one will have to suffer. With the world covered in darkness, it's the exact same thing king says. Actually, she said covered and he said blanketed. Okay, bub, you got me, but you know what I mean. So when Queen says that the Roaring Knight created her world, she doesn't actually know that. As she said before, she's simply assuming based on this person's actions. Now, let's address the Jevil line that seemingly confirms the knight is a single person. What if he's just wrong? Remember that Jevil is being fed information by someone else, and we have no idea if this person is credible or not. They could simply be wrong or intentionally giving Jevil false information to drive him insane. And yes, I'm aware that Jevil is at least partially telling the truth, since he successfully predicted Queen's appearance in the story, which would mean that he would need to know that the next Dark World would be opened in the computer lab, but partially true doesn't mean completely true, right? So he could could still be wrong about who actually created her dark world. Look, I get it, this is a pretty convoluted explanation. I'm not saying this is actually what's going on, just that it's technically possible, which means it's technically possible that the person who made the Card Kingdom Dark World is not the same person who made the Cyber City Dark World, and that the Knight is actually multiple people, each working towards their own goals. But who are these people? Well, let's start with the person who made the Closet and Unused Classroom Dark Worlds, who I'll be referring to as Knight number 1. I'm grouping the school Dark Worlds together because they were opened in basically the same location, thus they were likely made by the same person. We know for a fact that Knight number 1 wants to cause the Roaring because they were able to convince King that causing it would be a good idea, and you know, they literally call themselves the Roaring Knight, so this seems like a done deal. Now, the identity of Knight number 1 is truly a wild card. It could be Gaster, it could be Chris, it could be Father Alvin. I did toy with the idea of it being Alfie's, but I just couldn't make it work. It's just too out of character for her, especially since she sent Chris and Susie to the supplies closet when she knew there was a dark world in there, supposedly. I just can't imagine Alfie's willfully endangering the lives of children, so I think she's cleared from these accusations. But what about Gaster? He does have a strong connection to dark worlds. Entry 17 could have been about a dark world, which means Gaster has an interest in studying dark worlds, more on that later. Gaster was also shattered across time and space and exists as some sort of ghost or incorporeal being, so the end of the world wouldn't really affect him. He also talks about the Deltarune prophecy on Deltarune's official website, which I don't really know what that means, but clearly is important to the story in some way. So what if Gaster opened the 2 school dark worlds to study them? But if that's the case, why would he open them in the school of all places? Maybe he opened it in a semi-public place like the school because he wants to see what will happen if someone falls into it. I've brought this up before, but why does the door close when Chris and Susie go into the supplies closet? Like, why? Clearly, someone was waiting outside for someone to walk in so they could slam the door on them and trap them in the dark world. I wonder who would do such a thing. Maybe this person wants to study the effects a dark world will have on the body. Also, the reason he chose the closet over a more public place like one of the classrooms is because he doesn't want to bring too much attention to himself. He doesn't want to get caught, and he also doesn't want it to be obvious someone is missing. So he picks a place that's technically open to the public like the closet or unused classroom, but isn't a place people often go to, so he can maintain some level of secrecy. So it is possible Gaster is Knight number 1, but what other options are there? What about Chris? It's unclear what Chris's motive would be for causing the Roaring. Many things about Chris's motive are unknown, but I guess it is possible they could want to cause the Roaring for whatever reason, so they could be Knight number 1. I just personally doubt it because of the way Chris reacts to the supplies closet dark world, but hey, there are still people who insist Chris is a Knight despite this, so I'm sure I'm convincing someone. But what about Father Alvin? He has a very sussy scene in chapter 2 that implies he might be the Knight. He might also want to cause the Roaring for religious reasons, which I'll discuss in more detail later, so I just gave you 3 possibilities for who Knight number 1 could be. Pick the one you find most compelling. So now that I've explained who Knight number 1 could be, let's discuss who Knight number 2 is. There are so many suspects. It could be Gaster again, it could be Chris, which I strongly disagree with, but understand that some people believe. But what about Birdly or Noelle? I mean, out of everyone in town, these 2 had the greatest opportunity to create the dark world. I don't think it's Birdly because it's Birdly. I mean, it would be kind of hilarious if it was Birdly, but I honestly doubt Toby would make him the Knight. I did think for a hot minute it was Noelle, but if that's the case, that girl deserves an Oscar because she did a very good job pretending not to know what the fuck is going on, to the point where it seems a bit out of character, and by that I mean she would need to be some sort of sociopathic master manipulator to pull off that acting job. Now, Noelle does have a tendency to block out traumatic events, so I guess it's possible she opened the dark world but just doesn't remember. But then again, on the Snowgrave route, it's not like she doesn't remember anything. She obviously does, based on this scene where she contemplates all the times Chris coerced her into doing bad things. She's simply trying her hardest to forget. So I don't think she could completely forget opening a freaking dark world. Also, if she's already comfortable opening dark worlds, why does she spend the entire game refusing to obey Queen's orders and just open another dark world? It's not because she doesn't want to cause the Roaring, because she seems genuinely shocked when Rouse tells the team about the Roaring for the first time. So Noelle isn't really the best candidate for Knight number 2. But you know who is a very good candidate for Knight number 2? Mettaton. You know the Spamton Neo suit and how it's very similar to the Mettaton Neo suit? Why is that? Well, according to the Swatchlings, that robot was the embodiment of a Lightner's dream. A dream I helped to create once, splashing color from the motion of their hand. The Lightner filled it with hope, giving it an incredible power. I think the Swatchlings are supposed to be like MS Paint brushes, which means that at some point someone drew up the Spamton Neo suit in MS Paint, and since the Mettaton Neo suit is clearly like Mettaton's ideal body, see, it makes sense that he would be the one to draw it. The swatchling dialogue indicates Mettaton abandoned the drawing at some point, but what if he hadn't fully given up on it? What if he still was determined to make his dream a reality? What if he decided to study the occult to find some way to magically make his body, only for him to discover that if he opened the dark world, it would bring the objects of that room to life, including his dream body? But okay, if he opened the dark world to get his perfect body, why is he nowhere to be found in the actual dark world? Shouldn't he be in there searching high and low for his perfect body? Well, maybe he did look for a brief moment, but you gotta remember how hard it is to get to this Phantom Neo suit. First, you need to go through all these obstacles in Queen's mansion to get to this room, then you need to find the secret entrance to Queen's basement, then you need to get a keygen to unlock the encryption lock to get into the basement, then you need to ride this incredibly difficult teacup to disable the force field to finally get to the machine. Like, it's just a lot. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So it's very possible that Mettaton did try to search for it but realized it was impossible and gave up. That's why he's not in the room when the dark world closes. He's left way before that. Alright, so Mettaton is knight number 2. Who is knight number 3? It's Chris, obviously. I mean, we literally see them open a dark world before our very eyes, so there. But what about knight number 4? This is where things get interesting because from here on out, we're dealing with probabilities. We don't know where each dark world will be opened, which makes it harder to profile the people opening them. So from here, I'm just gonna give my best guesses. I'm not gonna go over every character who could possibly be the knight because there are just too many and other YouTubers have already done that. I'm just gonna give you my top picks. Also note that from here on out, the number next to the word knight doesn't indicate chronological order. Knight number 4 could be in chapter 4, but it could also be in chapter 5 or chapter 6, etc. With that being said, let's get into who I think knight number 4 is. I personally think it's Father Alvin. Here's why. Father Alvin has a scene at his father's grave where he says this, "Were you proud of me, father? And is it right for this hammer too?" This implies that he wants to do something morally questionable with his father's hammer. This morally questionable act could include opening a dark world. But why would he want to open a dark world? Maybe for religious reasons. Father Alvin is a priest at the church, and Hometown's religion appears to take inspiration from Christianity. The roaring sounds a lot like the rapture, another post-apocalyptic event, and the angel's heaven sounds a lot like the second coming of Christ, which happens right after the rapture. The second coming of Christ is when Jesus returns to the earth to judge the living and the dead. Could the angel's heaven be something similar? A way for the angel to judge the people on earth and wipe the world clean, following a post-apocalyptic event like the roaring? So Father Alvin may want to cause the roaring to bring judgment onto the world of Deltarune. Thus, Father Alvin does have a motive to open a dark world and could be knight number 4. He's likely to open this dark world in the church since that's where he works and it's being set up as a possible dark world location. Rudy's dialogue in chapter 2 talks of him wanting to go to church tomorrow. One of the newsletters implies that chapter 3 will take place over a single night, which means that church services will take place right after chapter 3 and chapter 4. Therefore, a church dark world is likely to happen then when everyone has a reason to be there. So if Father Alvin is knight number 4, what about knight number 5? Well, I think it's Undyne. Why? Well, before I tell you, if you're enjoying this video so far, you should check out the rest of my channel. All I make is Deltarune and Undertale theory content. If you end up liking them, make sure to subscribe and join my membership program. Okay, no more e-begging, let's get back into the theories. I think Undyne is a good candidate for knight number 5, and here's why. Before Chris opens chapter 3's dark world, Toriel calls the police. We know from the Wet-Nosed Bandits that Undyne likes to patrol the streets at night looking for bad guys. Thus, it makes sense that Undyne would be the one to respond to Toriel's calls. Chris opens the door before they open the dark world, which means that when Undyne responds to the scene, she will likely walk in the house and fall into the dark world. Undyne is terribly bored at her job as a police officer since there's barely any crime in Hometown. Her time in the dark world will likely be the most exciting thing that's happened to her in a while. This provides a possible motive for wanting to open a dark world in the future. She could learn how to open dark worlds in chapter 3 before deciding to make her own, just like how Chris learned how to open a dark world in chapter 2 and decided to make their own. Therefore, Undyne could be knight number 5. Now, Undyne doesn't strike me as the type of person who would put the public in danger, so if she was gonna open a dark world, it wouldn't be somewhere with a lot of people, like say, the police station. Now, I know what you're saying, the police station is literally a public place, how could she open a dark world there and not endanger people? Except, the police station gets so little foot traffic that Nafsablook feels comfortable closing up shop because they weren't feeling it. Like, can you imagine if a police station in a big metropolitan area did this? Like, there would be so many criminals getting away scot-free. But since Hometown has so little crime, people don't really go there that often. So maybe Undyne opened the dark world in her place of work to spice her life up. Overall, I think Undyne is a decently strong candidate for knight number 5, so let's move on to knight number 6. I think it's Noelle. So a big theme in these games is escapism. These dark worlds and media in general allow people to escape from the difficult difficulties of life, and someone who has an exceptionally difficult life is Noelle. Her sister is missing, presumed dead, her dad is seriously ill and hospital bound, and her mom is implied to be controlling and domineering. The only bit of relief she gets from this life is spending time with her father. Now, Rudy's exact condition isn't known, but it's implied to be pretty bad, maybe it's even terminal. So imagine how Noelle would react if the one good person in her life, her father, were to succumb to his illness. How devastated she would be. Maybe after this traumatic event, she decides to escape into the fantasy of a dark world. Remember these lines? I've never had an adventure like this before, with axes and battles and magic, where everything can be healed with one little spell. How about this line? I wish I knew healing magic in real life. Then I could make you better and it wouldn't just be me and mom. Yeah, Noelle clearly has a big motive to open a dark world in the hospital so she can use healing magic on her father, especially if her father were to die from his illness. Now, there's a common question asked in the fandom. What happens if an item covered in dust goes into a dark world? Since that item is infused with the monster's essence, would that person come back to life? I think the same question can be asked for monsters who have died but haven't turned to dust yet. What happens to the body of a monster who has fallen down goes into a dark world? Does that person come back to life? This may be another reason why Noelle would want to open a dark world in the hospital. Even if it doesn't work, a person who's grieving will try anything to save their loved one. And that's why I think Noelle is night number 6. So last we have night number 7. I think it's Gaster. I know, a very original idea, but here's why I think so. First, I think the last dark world is going to be in the bunker. I go into more detail on why I think this in my Predicting Dark Worlds video, which you should totally check out. But it basically amounts to foreshadowing and warm fuzzy feelings, which I know is not the most compelling argument, but just work with me here. As I mentioned before, the bunker has strong ties to Gaster, entry 17 in Dark Worlds. The bunker's ID is 17 in the game's files, and the strange sound coming from the bunker is the slowed down version of Muse_Smile, which is the song that plays during entry 17. Entry 17 talks of a darkness that's darker than dark, so its experiment could be on a dark world, which means that Muse_Smile could theoretically be a sound that a dark world could make. Though obviously the other dark worlds don't make that sound, so just ignore that. These entry 17 connections also connect Gaster to the bunker, so maybe Gaster opened the dark world in the bunker so he could continue experimenting on them, which would make him night number 7, and night number 1 if you think he opened the school dark world too. Oh geez, this script is 4,000 words long, so let's recap things before we get into my problems with the theory. So Gaster opened the school dark worlds because he wanted to cause the roaring out of scientific curiosity. Mettaton opened the computer lab dark worlds to bring his drawing of the Svanton Neo suit to life. It's unknown why Chris wants to open the TV dark world, but they do, so. Father Alvin wants to open a dark world in the church to cause the angels heaven for religious reasons. Noelle will open a dark world to bring Rudy back to life after he dies in the hospital. Undine will open a dark world in the police station because she's bored with her mundane life as a cop and wants to spice things up. And finally, Gaster opened the dark world in the bunker to do scientific experiments on it. 7 theories for 7 chapters. Hopefully this all made sense to you guys. Now I want to talk about the problems with the theory because there are many. Firstly, the explanation I gave at the beginning on how the knight could be multiple people is overly complex. A good theory should follow Occam's razor, meaning it should require the least amount of leaps in logic to work. All of the lines I brought up clearly indicate that the knight is a single person with a single motivation, and it'd be a very confusing writing decision to do this. I mean, there's misdirecting the audience and then there's this. The knight is being set up as the main antagonist of the story. You know, they want to open as many dark worlds as they can to cause the roaring. So it'd be very strange for the main antagonist to open 1 or 2 dark worlds and then disappear from the story completely and have the rest of the dark worlds made by different people. It makes more sense from a narrative perspective that there's only one knight and one antagonist. You know, maybe we get a couple of dark worlds opened by other people, but the bulk of the dark worlds should be made by the main villain, you know, the roaring knight. Otherwise, how are we supposed to fear the knight if they barely do anything in the story? So those are the reasons that I doubt the theory. And then there's also, you know, the Javelin that was probably just true. I mean, he does correctly predict that the queen is gonna exist eventually, so that line is probably just true. But yeah, I think there's probably just gonna be one knight, but it was a fun theory to, you know, explore and think outside the box, you know what I mean? So this is the end of the video, but what do you guys think? Do you think the knight is a single person or multiple people? Make sure to leave all your thoughts and theories in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you to my wonderful members, Mellow Mackie, PF247, Remy, Silly Willy Billy Silly, No Username, and Grey Leno. And to the rest of you, thank you for watching my video. Bye bye!